Welcome back to the 2026 edition of the Medieval Mundane Astrology Report. So, if you've been following me for a while, you saw that last year I did a report for the entire year ahead. I was one of the only people calling for a little bit of civil unrest, and we had some of that over the summer and the fall, obviously, with all of the ice incidents that took place. So, that is largely wrapping up now as we move into this new astrological new year. What I use is the Aries Ingress chart, which is when the sun moves in Aries, generally March 20th, 21st. That chart in and of itself is a delineation of the entire year ahead. We use that chart as well as the full moon or new moon that exactly precedes it. In this case, for this year, that will be a new moon. So I'm going to look at those charts as well as the king's chart, which in medieval astrology it was referred to. However, today we obviously have a president. So I'll be combining all of these to get a feel for where we're headed in 2026. So again, what we're using this year is the Aries Ingress chart. This is the spring equinox point. This is when the sun's ecliptic crosses that path of the equator of the Earth and it forms Aries point zero. So that is a main astrological event that predicts the entire year ahead. The Gregorian calendar really doesn't have any astrological events in it. So true New Year technically occurs at this time every March. That's why it was focused on so in depth. And I just want to give you a preview of what we're looking at in terms of houses and house meanings if you're not that familiar with mundane astrology and how we do these real world predictions. They're similar to your personal birth chart, but they're on a grander scale. So, for instance, the first house, instead of representing you and your skills, they represent the people at large, the public mood, if you will. The second house would be the overall treasury instead of your personal wallet. The sixth house, the labor classes. This can represent the public health. It also represents military service or civil service. The seventh house, while it represents your partnerships in a birth chart on this grander scale, it represents allies, it represents enemies, it represents the treaties that we enter into, diplomats, anything where we're dealing with a foreign nation. The 10th house itself is generally considered the executive, the ruler. In this case, it would be the house of the president and the commands and decisions that they give. 11th house, we have the allies of the ruler. So while these would be your friends in your personal chart, this could be their benefactors, their donors, their allies. I believe in our system, it would also represent Congress because they're kind of like the secondary decision makers, even though they kind of pretend they have more power. They're in reality the secondary decision maker, while the commander in chief is the true head. So I think we've already realize that if you've been following politics for any amount of time, that Congress is useless, right? So that's what we're going to start with, and these are the main houses that are activated. So I want to go through them. And jumping right into the chart here for the Aries Ingress chart, this is March 20th this year, 10:46 a.m. for Washington, D.C., because we are doing Washington, D.C., who runs the entire United States. So we're going to use their chart. Now, this starts with a Gemini ascendant. And remember, the ascendant, the first house, I am using whole signs for this. The ascendant is going to be representative of the people, the public mood at large. So there's a lot of information coming their way when we see this in Gemini. But the most important thing we have to look at is the ruler, right? Because there's not much happening in the first house. We're looking at Mercury, which is the ruler. Mercury is stationary. It's starting to come out of a retrograde period. So the people have felt stuck up to this point. It's also in its fall and detriment in Pisces. So this is a very weak Mercury. In my opinion, this is going to be a people that feel they want a voice, they want to influence the leader. However, they don't have any such sway. Their power is extremely weakened because we have, again, Mercury in its fall and its detriment and stationary. So they're trying to move things. They're trying to push events forward. They're trying to influence this leadership. However, they're not having much luck. And we're doing again because we're seeing that as the ruler of the first house also rules the fourth house, which is Virgo. And Mercury generally rules letters, contracts, uh, voice, decisions, anything that's going to require commerce, essentially, human interaction. So this is also representative of the fourth house, which is Virgo, and it's up here in the 10th house. So this means people that own land, they're trying to get involved in government. Peoples and families, they're trying to get involved. They're trying to influence this, but to no avail. So we might see something like this come around, especially pertinent probably around election time, I would imagine. So this is again the people trying to influence, but they have very little influence. So that is a big thing happening in the 10th house. And the 10th house itself, right? Mercury's retrograde. It's in its fall, it's in its detriment. This being the house of the king itself, the president in our case. This is someone that makes fuzzy decisions, right? Mercury in Pisces, again, it's in its fall. It's not thinking clearly. It's kind of doing things off the cuff, not thinking things through. And then we have that conjunct Mars. Mars in the 10th house in these charts was almost always associated with war. Um, so we are seeing that already. At the time I'm filming this, it is March 7th, and we have just essentially attacked Iran over the last week. So we already have that starting. And this is definitely indicative of war. It's Pisces. Pisces is a northern sign, but it's in a southern house, but it's in a water sign. That's the important thing, I believe, because this is going to represent shipping lanes. It's going to represent naval affairs, especially with Mars in a water sign. So we might be seeing more protection in those areas, like protecting the straits, protecting the shipping routes, anywhere where there's commerce being done. Remember, Mercury is going to represent commerce as well in this situation. So we have Army, Mars, also represented by the sixth house. Remember, we just talked about the sixth house. This can be representative of civil service, military service. Uh, these guys, which are in this house, are up here in the 10th. They're fighting for the president. All right. Also, the 11th house, which is Aries, is going to be, a Mars ruler, and that is up in the 10th house. So at the time of this recording, everyone's saying, oh, it's an illegal war, no congressional authority. It does look like there will be congressional authority because we have the support of this 11th house, donors, benefactors, probably Congress up in this 10th house. So I do believe that will change. And I want to talk a little bit more about this 11th house because this is where the sun falls. The sun is in Aries. It's conjunct Neptune, which I'm not going to worry too much about just yet. But as a general significator of the sun representing the king, Saturn representing in Aries being in its fall, a more tyrannical king, someone that holds on very tightly. They're very authoritative, and they might be doing that because they feel that they're losing their grasp and their decisions are not good. Again, we have Mercury in retrograde in the 10th house. We also have Venus here, and we have Moon. However, Moon is separating. But with Neptune, again, being a more modern planet, it wasn't used traditionally, but in my interpretation, I would say that this would be a government, a king that uses a lot of propaganda. They're likely lying, and they're probably going to be caught in those lies as well, because this is very high up in the public domain in the 11th house, so it's visible. And with Sun and Saturn being conjunct in Aries, because they are in moiety here, they are in orb, only a few degrees apart from one another. This is, again, it's a harsher executive power. There's also more pressure on the legitimacy of the leader themselves. This is a burden. This is considered a very burdensome aspect where there are a lot of rules, there's a lot of pressures, but then they're going to use authority and kind of this authoritativeness. Might makes right almost when I see that, especially in Aries. However, they're also under stress. There's a lot of stress there, and this would be both for Congress and the executive, because again, the sun is the general delineator, it's the general significator, but then it's in that kind of donors and 11th house of supporters of the king. So from this standpoint, there's strain that shows up through allies, traditionally, the ministers, the people that would be supporting the king or the executive. So I feel like there will be a lot of pressure on the allies, the supporters to change and to make a change. However, they're very weak. And another reason that they're very weak is because we also have Venus there. And Venus is normally going to be able to compromise. anytime we do mundane, especially related to government, Venus is all about compromise. Venus brings together while Mars separates. So it would normally bring people together. It would find common ground in some way. But remember, Venus is in Aries this year, so it's in detriment. It doesn't have its power. So this could be pushing too much force, trying to verbally make things happen and bring people together. However, there is just too much animosity to do that. So diplomacy is weak with Venus up here in Aries. And the messaging is poor. All the messaging coming from the government, from the executive themselves, with Mercury retrograde in its fall. And the diplomacy and the support you would expect from Venus is not going to be that helpful. And as a side note, quickly, since Venus rules the fifth house, which is generally fun, it's sex, it's games, it's the enjoyment of the public at large, and that's going to be up here in this 11th house, which again, it's in detriment, it's out of place. So we might see more to the scandals that are already going on in relation to Epstein. So, fifth house topics, again, which include sex, they're getting exposed. So, this is the private side of the chart on the bottom, right? And everything is up here in the top, which is the public side. This is the visible sky right above us. So, again, we're having kind of that exposure come out where you're seeing that. Also, Saturn in its fall, all of these things, right? Saturn is the exaltation ruler of Libra, which is the fifth house. Venus is the domicile ruler. They're both up here in the 11th house. So I would expect congressional scandals to come out in relation to those events as well. This might not only involve the executive, but we're going to see more Congress members and peoples of government kind of get exposed, it looks like. Now, the saving grace for this is the treasury. All right. Jupiter is in the second house. It's exalted. It's in Cancer. This is one of the best placements for Jupiter. It just started going direct, I believe, about a week before this. So Jupiter is moving again. The public treasury starts to pick up. I know at the time of this recording, everyone is very concerned. Oil prices have skyrocketed. But I do see that the government will somehow make money out of this. And Jupiter, in this case, rules the seventh house of Sagittarius, and it's going to rule the 10th house. So, what do we have here? We have the seventh house, remember, which represents foreign governments and foreign affairs. Their money is coming into our coffers. So, whatever these wars are, it does look like they're going to pay off for our government in some way. Now this can be allies of the government mostly, right? Obviously, maybe not the commoners so much, but the allies of the government do seem to make a lot of money. And as a rule, the leader of the 10th house, Pisces, which is the executive themselves, that's also down here. This looks like they end up making a good amount of money from this. And it's supporting this Mars, right? So, Mars, again, the planet of war in the 10th house, is exactly trine this Jupiter. So, war for financial benefit. And that's what's shown in the chart. Isn't that ironic? Mars, war, Jupiter, financial benefit in trine, supporting each other, taking the money of the foreign government here, which rules the seventh house, and putting it into the second house of our coffer. It's funny how this works, isn't it? Then we also have to let me look at Mercury one more time to see what I believe is how this is going to play out, though. Remember, Mercury rules the fourth house and the first house, the people's voice. However, the people are very weak. But this is also showing an indecisive leadership that relies on that propaganda. We have that with Sun Neptune, lies, propaganda, but we also have indecision and reversal of decision with this being in fall. So I would not be surprised if in a short time, and this is another technique we can do to even narrow down when this is going to happen using primary directions, which I might do in another video, or even profections. But I would not be surprised here if in a relatively quick time that it's over and that they declare victory, even though it's clearly not a victory. They'll just declare victory and pretend it never happened because of this Mercury in fall, detriment, and stationary. So it's like a reversal. Go in, do it, get out, declare victory, get the money stabilized. And that's what I'm looking at here for how I think that's going to play out based on that Jupiter. And they're all going to make money from this, everyone in the government. Remember, Venus is up here in Aries. Yes, it's in its detriment, but we also have Venus with the moon up here, and the moon is the ruler of this second house of the treasury. And that's going right up here into this 11th house because moon, which rules Cancer, is found in Aries. So the treasury money is going to support allies and members of Congress. Isn't that a shocker? We do not see the people getting much out of this at all because they're ruled by Mercury in both houses here. They are retrograde and in fall. However, the leaders themselves do seem to get paid in a good, in a large way. And again, as kind of a general indicator of the public, the moon represents the public's emotions, their feelings towards the government at large, especially being up here in the 11th house. With Venus in detriment, again, it does feel like they try to compromise, they try to make people feel good. However, in the end, they're not able to bring people together because all of this is in detriment. And emotions are going to be very hot because the moon is in Aries, which is that fire sign. It's very impulsive. It's very hot-headed. There's likely going to be arguments and calls for recalls. These kinds of things are very likely to happen with that placement, especially over public finance. However, the government itself looks like they are going to be fine in making more money, but I do believe that come 2027, this is when this is going to become more of a problem. But before we make any final decisions about what all of this means, we have to look at another chart. We have to look at the new moon that directly preceded this, which is going to be on March 18th. This chart is March 18th, 2026 at 9:24 in Washington, D.C., 9:24 p.m. Here we have Libra ascendant, and we have Venus, which rules Libra, and Saturn, the exaltation ruler of Libra, over here in Aries, which is a fire sign. We talked about that. So what does that mean? The people, what are they doing? They're fighting in foreign wars. So we are seeing that, unfortunately. Aries itself is an easterly sign. It is in this case in a Western house. So we could either see something on two fronts here, but we also might see something just play out in this heat context, which I would expect Aries being a fire sign. The fighting is done somewhere hot, like a desert. So I believe we are already seeing that. And it does look like in this context, we're seeing more fighting than in the last chart as far as the people go. The people are going to foreign places to fight. Now, Venus also rules the eighth house. The eighth house is the house of death. It's the same as in your personal birth chart. So this rules death, this rules endings, this can rule financial hardships. We find that in the seventh house, again, in detriment. Saturn is also here in the seventh house. Saturn in this chart rules the fourth and fifth house. So again, the homeland, the fourth house, people's homes in general, families, they end up going to these foreign places to fight. So I do believe before, in the last chart we looked at, we said, okay, ultimately there's going to be a decision reversal. I do believe that's still going to stand. However, before that happens, it does look like we are going to see a considerable amount of casualties, honestly, because I'm getting this. This is a pretty obvious delineation. The ruler here is over here fighting, but also Venus rules the eighth house of death, and that is over here in these foreign lands. And because the eighth house is also allies of the foreign enemies, and Venus is over here, I feel like this also represents people sympathizing more with the enemy than they do with their own government at this point. So you might see some of that. You might see protests here in the homeland supporting them more than they support our own troops. So I do believe this will not be a popular war. It does not seem to be already. And I'm sure as this drags on, it's going to get even more ridiculous before they finally change course. Now, the sixth house, very active as well. Remember, sixth house is going to rule public health, but it also rules civil service and military service. We have that Mercury retrograde here. We have Mars conjunct Mercury. We have the sun and the moon because this is where the new moon occurs. So again, fighting. Military members are fighting. We also have the ruler of this sixth house up here in the 10th, which is Cancer. So again, a lot of water signs fighting in naval affairs, protecting shipping straits. I would expect that. Mercury is also retrograde here. So we have indecisiveness, not only from the executive, which we saw in the last chart, but I'm also getting indecisiveness from the troops and possibly generals here related to this. There's a lot of reversals of decisions, realizing that wrong decisions were made. Now, again, though, we do have Jupiter trining here, which is more supportive. So we do have reception. There is reception here. So it looks like the troops ultimately will get support. However, decisions will be changed. And it looks like the military is going to get a lot of financing because we have this Jupiter trine Mars. And remember, Jupiter is the executive. And it's as the second house ruler too, Mars, I'm just noticing this. Mars rules the second house of Scorpio, the financial aid. Our coffers are going to our military, which is this sixth house. So you will see a lot of money spent on military spending. I believe there will likely be another budget act based on this. You might see a military budget act where they feed a lot of money into the military. And if there are challenges from court, generally law and judges are going to be represented by the ninth house. And that is a mercurial sign, Gemini. It's also the 12th house, which would be hidden affairs, hidden enemies. They're down here retrograde and in fall in Pisces. So we have a very weak legal system. If there are challenges to this, it does look like they would fail. I would also expect, as the ninth house is a general house of long distance travel, that you will see Americans having to leave countries. And I do believe we're already starting to see that, but it looks like that is also going to pick up. Now, we also have Venus square Jupiter exactly in this chart. Venus and Jupiter, when they are in square, tends to overdo the good times. It thinks the good times are never going to stop. They overdo things. They get overly confident and cocky. So I am seeing that with money wasted. It does look like, again, we're going to see money wasted, but we're also going to have acquisition because Mars is trine Jupiter. So Mars trine Jupiter brings a lot of energy, acquisitions of finances, again, because Mars rules the second house. But we also have this wastefulness with this Venus square Jupiter. So, we might see foreign countries contracting. I believe we're going to see a lot of shenanigans and tomfoolery going on with relation to the budget and where they are spending money. So, anytime they pass one of these acts, we get contractors coming in that are less than scrupulous. In this case, those contractors may even come from other countries that we decide to work with. And because Saturn is also with Venus, you might see any agreements entered into be a little bit more coercive in working with allies even. We might see a lot of pressure put on allies to work with us, to do what we say, and it's going to be very coercive. And ultimately, again, Venus is in its fall in Aries or its detriment, and we have Saturn there in its fall. These are going to be very weak, exploitative collaborations, however they are play out. And I don't believe that they will last long because of that. And with the sixth house also, having Mars and being a general significator of the public health, as it is in your own private chart, with Mars here, we might see flare-ups of injuries, illness, in relation to other areas as well besides war, because this is that general significator. But as a ruler of the eighth and the first being over here in the seventh, it does look like there will be troops on the ground in foreign countries, and there will be the eighth house representing fear and death and whatnot is going to be over here in these foreign countries. And I wanted to go through a couple historic parallels that I find. Similar years that had Mars in the 10th house specifically. 1964, there was an Aries Ingress with Mars in the 10th house. It was in Pisces as well. And that year we had the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We also had Brazil's March coup, which apparently we helped support. There was an escalation pattern there. Remember how I said I think that this is the prelude year to the more, the bigger year of war, which will be 2027. And a similar thing occurred back then in 1964. That Gulf of Tonkin incident occurred, and it pushed us even farther into the conflict. So to wrap up those two charts and look at the combined meeting, we see themes of power and themes of legitimacy. We have the people and the state, they're very entangled. The people are trying to get more involved to influence the leadership. However, they have very little voice. Their voice is weakened. There's public contests probably around the legality, communications. These are all mercurial topics. So there will be more contested, probably results related to any of those topics. This could represent elections as well. So we might see a contested election. I would not be surprised, because Mars is so prominent in both of these charts, that there is some kind of state of emergency ultimately declared. And the courts have very little power. Foreign affairs, both charts are showing a lot in the foreign affair department, specifically war, because a lot of this is Mars related. So Pisces being the 10th house, especially in the Aries Ingress chart, this is a maritime chart. So again, naval affairs are going to really start coming to the top. Then that Mars-Jupiter harmony, however, it is supporting the government. So I do expect that ultimately their war will be successful, at least according to them, before a reversal of policy comes through that Mercury retrograde. The economy itself, because Jupiter is exalted in that secondary chart, I do feel like the economy is ultimately boosted through these wars. And unfortunately, that's one of the primary reasons we go to war. No matter what the propaganda says, it's always about money. Everyone gets rich during wartime, just not the people that go to fight it, unfortunately. So that's what I see there. Saturn and Mercury retrograde, procedural drag, delays, policy rewrites. So we are seeing that already in the uneven execution, kind of the indecisiveness, things not going to plan or just no plan at all. Then we have some social blocks, because Moon Venus are both female planets, and they're in that 11th house Aries, which is that male sign, but Venus is in its detriment. It does look like women-led initiatives or female public figures start to speak out. I would not be surprised at all to see a prominent female possibly in Congress or some kind of a supporter of the government, where they start having a voice. Maybe they're running for office and they start getting very popular. Generally, this Aries chart is a prelude for the whole year. And then every quarter, we look at either, the equinox charts, we're going to look at the solstice charts every few months when there is an astrological event. And you time it and you break it down more based off of those charts. Now, the last thing I want to do before I wrap up this video is kind of go through the president's chart. So we'll look a little bit at Donald Trump's chart. And I'm going to relate that to what I saw last year, because there was an Aries solar eclipse last year, which always affect the king. And this would be the time when it started affecting them, because it's a longer term time frame when you look at eclipses, especially a solar eclipse. You're generally looking at years worth of influence. And this would be the frame, according to my videos last year, if you watched them, when this was most likely to start occurring. So I have Donald Trump's chart here. I have this in alcohobitious houses. I don't use whole signs for this one just because his ascendant is so late that you really can't use whole signs for that. So the big one I want to look at is Aries, because this is where that solar eclipse in Aries happened around this time last year, and that was at 8 degrees. It was roughly 8 degrees Aries. So when we see Saturn specifically reach 8 degrees Aries, which is going to happen late April. Let me give you the exact time frame. Yeah, mid to 8 April. So this is just a transit chart I'm looking at. And in April, early April, April 6th, this is at 6 degrees Aries. As the month goes on, you will see this become exact. So any planets that start hitting around this area, yeah, here it is, because Mars is also going to enter Aries at this time. So this is where we start seeing detriment. We might be seeing ill health here as well, also rash decisions. But because he is a ruler, and this is the king's chart, I expect death. I'm not going to be blunt about it. I expect a lot of casualties based on this because we have both Mars and Saturn in this sign. Mars, again, it's going to represent military might, and Saturn over here is already, afflicted in its fall, and these two are getting together. So I will expect conflict. This is square his natal Mercury. So we have poor decisions being made. We have rash decisions being made because Mars is square Mercury. Saturn square Mercury is, it's in its fall already. So these are just life and death decisions. So all of these are in square. All right. And as this year goes on, this is when this event is really going to kick off. And you are going to see the people very angry. They're going to try to get involved in politics and influence this, but they're going to have a very weak voice, unfortunately. So I would not expect any change in the momentum based on elections or anything like that. Possibly even some shenanigans with elections because Mercury was in fall and stationary in both of those earlier charts. But again, as this year goes on, all of this is going to start squaring his natal Venus, his natal Saturn. So it does look like, possibly there will be some legal challenge to him later, probably not this year. Again, more in 2027. I'm expecting that legal challenges to come up, especially as we get fully embroiled in something bigger. And I'm going to show you why I think that. This is a bonus to the video. So if you've stayed here this long, congratulations. Let's look at where next year goes and why I think that this is all going to really heat up then. So we are going to find the exact moment the sun enters Aries. Just look at that chart for a quick second. Here we go. Yep. Okay. Okay. So for this one, we have the first house representing the people, which is the sun. It's up here in this eighth house. Actually, no, this one's in the ninth. But you know what? I might split this because this is everything is so close to the cusps. I might run this in Alcabitius as well. But it looks like we have Mars in the first with Jupiter. So the people are very upset. They're very angry. They have Venus over here in the seventh house. Okay, so maybe that's different than I thought. So this is our bonus chart. This is March 20th, 2027. And we have Mars in the first house. We have Venus in the seventh house. And these guys are exactly diametrically opposed within 2 degrees. Mars is also retrograde in the first house. Jupiter is retrograde in the first house. The sun, which rules the first house, Leo, is in the early stages of the ninth house here, conjunct Neptune, but also we have Saturn up here. So it does look like this is when legal challenges start taking effect, because I do believe there will be massive legal challenges likely to a wartime situation because Venus in the seventh is opposing this Mars in the first. Mars is retrograde, so the people want nothing to do with this foreign affair. However, the executive, which is represented by Taurus, Venus rules Taurus, is over here in the seventh. So it does look like there is some kind of attempted negotiation. However, we are still fighting because we have this Mars opposite Venus. So I believe there's some drama there coming, but there is also an attempt to use the court system this time around, and it looks like the courts will have a little bit more power. So I would expect there to be massive changes coming that year. But I'll get in more into this. I might change my mind come next year because I have not done the full delineation on both the charts yet. I just wanted to give you a quick preview. So I hope mundane astrology is starting to make a little bit of sense. I tried to explain it as best as I could, but if you have questions, I know I go through a lot. Feel free to let me know if I glossed over something or you just need a little more clarity about some of the techniques I use. So hit me up, let me know in the comments. Also, make sure you are liked and subscribed to my channel. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in the next video.